Based visualization systems provide visual representations of datasets designed to help people carry out tasks more efficiently. Our understanding of visualization design is based on how well people can compare pairs of points. But as people face more and more data, visualization must move beyond the small-scale design thinking to understand how design might support people understanding large collections of data points. And a way to help users understand this large collection of data is by optimizing where a user's attention will be directed. However, for designers to be able to fully take advantage of a user's attention, we need to develop fundamental models of how people perceive visualized data to drive more effective tools for all domains. Drawing from research in psychology and vision science, many visual features have been identified to be known as pre-attentive, or in other words, these are visual features that can be processed without our conscious action in under 500 milliseconds. While some models exist about how some visual features are processed by users, it is still difficult for designers to know how these different visual features will compare to one another. Hi everyone, my name is Ari, and I'm a research assistant at the University of Saskatchewan. And in this video, I will present our work where we evaluate, compare, and model pre-attentive visual effects for data visualization design. So, what's the main takeaway from our paper? Well, through two user studies, we model how people perceive three emphasis effects and their different levels of magnitudes in visualization. So here's a brief outline of the rest of the video. First, I'll provide some background on visual attention and graphical perception and how that relates to emphasis. Then I'll describe both of our studies, what we found, and how we model these visual effects. So let's begin with a little bit of background as to what motivated us to do this work. Human perception plays an important role in the area of visualization. For many years, vision researchers have been investigating how the human visual system analyzes images. One very important feature about human vision that we gotta keep in mind when designing visualizations is that at any given moment, detailed vision for shapes and colors is only possible with a very small portion of your visual field, which is approximately the size of your thumbnail when viewed at an arm's length. In order to see more details about other regions in our visual field, our eyes move rapidly, alternating brief stationary periods across regions while information is acquired. This fixation saccade cycle repeats roughly 3 to 4 times every second without us really realizing it. For many years, most research has focused on the consequences of selecting an object or location for more detailed processing. And this focus has led to a number of attention theories based on our selective nature for perception, which includes filtering or perceptual bottlenecks, limited resources, or mental and cognitive skills required for certain tasks. One very important finding of these theories is the discovery of some very basic visual features that are detected very rapidly. And these features have been since then called pre-attentive visual features. Typically, in pre-attentive tasks, such as identifying whether a target is different from the rest, this task can be completed in under 250 milliseconds. These targets with a very distinct property, such as a red hue in figure 1b, allows the target to pop out and be easily identified. And there's many basic features that have been identified to be known to pop out. And visualization designers have been using this knowledge to design effective visualizations, primarily to provide an emphasis to a region of interest. For example, an emphasis effect can be created in a scatter plot by using any of the effects shown in this slide. For example, highlighting, blurring, size, depth, or transparency. With so many different techniques to provide emphasis, however, it is difficult for designers to know how these different emphasis effects will compare, and how to ensure that a user's experience with one effect will be similar to that experience with a different effect. Theoretical frameworks of emphasis effects already exist. For example, this previous work by Hall and colleagues where they link diverse emphasis effects to the idea of visual prominence. However, Most metrics for predicting how emphasis effects will be perceived by users come from abstract models of human vision, which don't always apply to visualization design. So, to address this gap, we carried out two user studies to provide empirical evidence about how users will perceive different visual effects, using three main visual variables: color, size, and blur, and eight different strength levels. So our first study aims to provide a baseline of perceived emphasis for these three visual variables: color, blur, and size. We built simple scatter plots. We place a bunch of distractors across the screen, which simulates other data points, and then one of the data points may be visually different. For example, in this slide, you can see one of the data points is bigger. The main task was for users to click on the emphasized data point. We also use eye tracking to help us understand a user's behavior in the task. So we measure a user's reaction time. This means time for the first fixation on the emphasized data points and time to the mouse click on data points for each visual effect across their eight strength levels. Additionally, we ask participants to rate on a scale from 1 to 7 their perceived emphasis. This means how different was the target from the distractor. For full details about the study, please be sure to check out our paper. Now you have an idea of how the study worked. So let's get on to the results. Okay, so here's a general overview of our results. The graph to the right shows the results from the three types of emphasis effects at their eight strength levels. One quick takeaway from this graph is that all of the effects seem to start relatively equal at level 1. And for size and blur, they seem to continue to behave pretty similarly as they increase in magnitude of difference. Color seems a little bit weaker than those two. So with these results, we can begin to see how these different effects compare to each other. We were also interested in building empirical models. So we then decided to fit a simple logarithmic curve to those lines. So let's see how that looks. And here we can see that a simple log curve fits our empirical means pretty well, with an R value as high as 0.96 for an effect like size. Another very important result that we have are those of the subjective ratings. We had asked participants to rate on a 1 to 7 scale how emphasized the target appeared to you when compared to the background elements. Subjective ratings are very important for designers because, after all, they really tell us how participants perceive the effects. The main takeaway from this graph is that perceived difference increases as our magnitude increases, which is expected. But we can now see a clear difference between the visual effects. We can see that blur was perceived as the strongest one in most emphasis levels. We also feel a similar log curve to the lines, resulting in similarly high R-squared values. So now that we have our baseline results on these basic scatter plots and a predictive model, we wanted to see how emphasis effects are affected by more complex graphics. And we wanted to test whether we can use our model to predict how our effects will perform. So what do I mean by more complex graphics? Well, visualizations in the wild are not always simple scatter plots. They usually contain labels and other kind of information that's usually useful for readers to help them understand the graphics. This also means that there's a lot of more information that can grab a user's attention. And previous research tells us that when users are presented with a graph with labels and titles, they're very likely to focus on actually reading those text and labels, in addition to the visualization itself. This means that in more complex visualizations, our emphasis effects may struggle to be as effective. So this is a perfect opportunity for us to test our effects and our predictions based on the logarithmic curves that we created before. So for this new experiment, we took a subset of the mass-piece dataset and modified one of the data points in each graph to match the emphasis effects and levels tested in the first experiment. For example, here we have our baseline graph in the left. Then on the right, we have the modified graph where one of the data points appears to be larger than the rest. It is also important to say that the graphs that we picked in this new experiment are all of those have scatterplot-like visual features. For example, points in a map. So that's a basic overview of the second study, and you can read all the details in the paper. But in the basic sense, the task remains the same. Users click on the target. However, for the interest of time, we subset our emphasis effects to just present levels 1, 4, and 7. And here are the results for the time to click on the target. You can see our predictions in the dashed lines and the empirical means in the solid lines. You can see that given that there's other kind of information available in real-world graphics, our predicted means are about 3 seconds under the actual means, which is expected, but what's interesting is that the shape of the curve is actually pretty similar. So in a way, we can see that we are almost able to predict the behavior of the effects in real-world graphics, but with about a 3-second difference to account for the other kind of information available in these graphics. And if we look at the selected ratings, we can see that our predicted means are very close to empirical means. This is a very valuable finding as we may consider a user's perception of emphasis as a more important measure for designers than the user's gaze patterns or their click behavior. We also have other interesting results such as the actual gaze behavior and the participant comments available on our paper. So, what does all this data mean for visualization design? Well, different effects are perceived differently by people. For example, blur always led to the fastest target fixation and target click that was always rated the highest in terms of visual prominence. Second, a predictive model based on logarithmic curves fit the study 1 data pretty well. It was reasonably accurate at predicting the results in the study 2. Finally, as you increase the magnitude of difference, the perceived emphasis also increases, but with diminishing effect. We always saw a tailing off effect as we increase the difference, which calls for these effects to be tested at different levels. So how can we use some of the results for visualization design? Well, for example, a global effect such as blur can achieve a high perceived visual prominence. It's also relatively unaffected by a visualization's background when trying to create an emphasis effect. Through our results, we show that predictive models of perceived visual prominence can be a valuable tool for designers. Although our model is still just a first step, it was already able to predict the results from study 2 reasonably well, and can already be used to compare the equivalence between the 3 effects that we tested. Our current results also led to a few questions that we still want to answer. For example, we were only able to test 3 kinds of visual effects, but there are so many other visual variables that are great candidates for creating emphasis effects. Also, our experimental viewing conditions were controlled and remained very stable throughout our studies. However, future work could extend our results by using larger samples and different viewing conditions, mainly achieved through crowdsourcing methods. So to recap, through 2 user studies, we model how people perceive 3 emphasis effects and their different magnitudes in visualizations. Our predictive models were shown to work reasonably well beyond simple graphics. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. Thank you.